Hey everybody, welcome back to the Relentless Sportsman channel. My name is Corey, and on today's video I'm going to show you exactly how I locate summer crappies. The best part is you don't need a locator or any electronics whatsoever. Stay tuned. Have you ever struggled to find summer crappies? And I'm going to share with you 2 tips that are going to make your life a whole lot easier when it comes to finding crappies in the summer. I don't know about you, but finding crappies in the springtime is pretty easy. All you need to do is go up shallow on weed edges, throw out a bobber with a minnow and a hook. You're probably going to catch some crappies because that's where they go to spawn. But the rest of the year, that's a different story. You see, after the springtime, the crappies actually go out away from the weeds, out in deeper water, and suspend for the majority of the year. But there are times when the crappies go in shallow towards those weeds, which brings me to tip number 1. If you want to find and locate crappies, you need to find what I call isolated weed beds. Isolated weed beds are a section of weeds that are kind of like an island. In other words, they're weeds that aren't connected to the shore. On occasion, you can find crappies cruising the weed edges with the weeds that are connected to the shore, but the isolated weed beds draw in crappies more often. So the reason for this is quite simple. Considering that crappies suspend out in deeper water in the middle of the day, those isolated weed beds are closer to where the crappies suspend. And since those isolated weed beds are closer to where the crappies suspend during the day, when the crappies do come in to feed on minnows, which is their favorite food by the way, they're not going to travel across the lake to do that. They're going to go to the nearest weed bed to where they are during the day. So that's tip number 1, fish isolated weed beds. And here we go with tip number 2. So for tip number 2, you need to understand something about crappies. Crappies are what we call low light feeders. They feed very early in the morning and late in the evening. And when I say early, I mean early. It's very difficult to arrive to the lake at 8 a.m. expecting to hit the crappies big time in the middle of the summer. What I suggest for you to do is get there at first light. That means you have to get up when it's dark, drive when it's dark, and get to the landing right when you can start seeing. And for the first hour or 2, or maybe 3 if you're lucky, if it's cloudy and there's some chop on the water, that's prime time crappie fishing, especially around those isolated weed beds. Another great time is just before the sun goes down. That last hour of light is really good for catching crappies by those weeds. Every now and then people are going to get lucky. They're going to catch crappies during the middle of the day. It happens. It's happened to me. Most likely it's not going to happen though very often. It's very inconsistent. You want to really focus on isolated weed beds and really focus on the very early parts of the day and the last parts of the day. The last thing that people might be wondering is, what do I catch them with in the middle of the summer? What I like to use are 3 completely different baits, and I kind of switch up between them, sometimes 4, depending on how well the crappies are biting that day. What I do is I take these moving baits as I cast to the weeds, bring it back to the boat. If you really want to cover water and cover a lot of water fast, using a moving bait like a spinner bait is probably the best way to do it. Is a moving bait the best bait for crappies? I don't know, that's debate. But what I really know is that when you cover a lot of water, you find out which isolated weed bed those crappies are feeding at, and that's where you want to key in on. You may go to a couple different weed beds and not get any bites, and all of a sudden you get to one and you catch 5, 6, 7, maybe even 10 crappies on a small weed bed. Check out this video example I'm about to show you right here. What I'm doing is I'm allowing the wind to drift me past this island, and I'm casting to the island and back to the boat, just like I spoke about a minute ago. Got something here. It's like a nice little crappie. Oh, nice. On the beetle spin. Just working around these weeds that are suspended a little bit. It's really not that hard. All you need is a kayak or a small boat to do something like this. It requires no electronics. You just need to find these isolated weed beds, go catch some crappie. In this next example, this is what I really like to do, and I try to do if I can, is I took my small boat and I put it right on top of those weeds. I drove my boat right in there, and it was a small enough island of weeds that I could fan cast all the way around the island, and that really helped me cover water quickly. Check this one out. Here we go. Ooh, a nice crappie. What a dandy. That's a nice fish, you guys. Beauty. Right on the beetle spin. Pink beetle spin for crappie. Alright, let's review what we just learned so far. Tip number 1, find isolated weed beds, not the weeds that are by the shore. Find the weed beds that are kind of like islands and really focus in on those. Tip number 2, fish the first hour or two of the day and the last hour or two of the day. Low light conditions with those isolated weeds is killer for summer crappies. Remember, those isolated weed beds, they're weeds that you can see above the water, but there's a lot of weeds that are below the water, and crappies love cruising around on those, going up to the weeds that you can see and going around them. So just because you're not seeing the weeds doesn't mean they're below the surface. So you really want to keep that moving bait going pretty fast. Keep your rod tip up like at a 45 and keep that bait moving pretty fast so it's not getting hooked in the weeds all the time. You get any weeds on your bait, you're probably not going to catch any crappies. So the moving baits that I like to use for crappies are as follows. Number 1 is the beetle spin. That's my favorite one to use for crappies. I don't know why it works so well, it just does. So get out there and find some beetle spins. They're not expensive. Just get 1 or 2 different colors, pink, green, whatever, white. You're going to have some luck catching crappie. I like to use the 16th ounce jig because that's the perfect weight for casting on a light action rod. The second bait I like to use for crappies in search mode are lipless crankbaits. Small lipless crankbaits, 1 inch, maybe up to 2 inches at the most. Those cover water, they make a lot of noise, and you can rip them back to the boat. You don't have to fish them straight back to the boat. You can pause, you can rip it back as fast as you want. That's really, really good at catching crappies in low light conditions around weeds. The third bait I like to use for catching crappies, and this isn't really in particular order by any means, it just depends on what they want for the day, but my third favorite one are homemade spinners that actually my uncle makes, and it's just an inline spinner with a wire. It's got some kind of blade on it that spins, a couple of beads that you can get from any store like Joann Fabrics or whatever, and it's got a single hook that you can pair up with a minnow or a worm. That works really well for finding crappies. So if you want to find crappies next time in the middle of the summer, get out to a lake, try to find these isolated weed beds, use some baits that I just mentioned. Maybe you can try some other ones. I'm sure there are many that work. Go in the very early hours of the morning or the late hours in the evening. You're probably going to have some luck. And I really hope you learned something new in this video. If you have any tips or strategies that you like to use for catching summertime crappies when nobody else seems to be catching them, let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear what you have to say about that. And if you haven't yet, please consider subscribing to the Relentless Sportsman channel. I love to see the channel grow, and it's come a long way. It's still got a ways to go yet. Thank you for your support. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.